You touched my desk. That is completely unacceptable. You're fired. Get out!
I can't be fired, sir. You see, I bought your company this morning.
It started with silence. Not the gentle kind that soothes a room, but the heavy kind. The kind that hums between marble floors and glass walls, echoing through empty space like a ghost of power. That silence lived inside the mansion of Alden Cross, a man who built empires out of code and crushed anyone who stood in his way. His world gleamed with perfection, polished stone, gold fixtures, imported art. But beneath all that shine was something cold, something hollow. And into that world walked Elena, a maid with quiet eyes and steady hands. Every morning before dawn, she entered that grand office with its view that stretched across the city like a king's throne. She wasn't paid to look, only to clean. So she did. She wiped, dusted, polished, each motion soft, respectful, invisible. That desk, oh, that desk was sacred ground. Made of deep mahogany, carved edges smooth as silk, it wasn't just furniture, it was power, it was control. To Alden Cross, that desk represented his empire. To Elena, it was just another surface, until that one morning when her fate changed with a single gesture. She had done it 1,000 times before, sprayed, wiped, stepped back. But this time, a tiny speck of dust sat on the corner of a silver frame, a photograph of a woman smiling against the sunlight. His late wife, the only human thing in that entire sterile room. The dust bothered her. She hesitated, then reached out. Her fingers brushed the frame, lifted it carefully, wiped it clean. A moment of kindness, a simple act of care. Then came the sound that split the air in two. The door, slamming open like a gunshot. Elena froze, the photo still in her hand. "What are you doing?" His voice was sharp, cold, made of steel and pride. She turned slowly, her eyes wide, lips parting to explain, but no words came. Her heart pounded so hard it drowned out the silence. I was just... He stepped closer. "I told you never to touch my desk." Each word dropped like a hammer. The frame trembled in her hands. Her throat went dry. "Sir, it was just dust. You're fired." Just like that. No hesitation. No question. No thought. The world stopped moving for her. The photo slipped from her grip, landing face down on the polished wood. She flinched at the sound, then bent quickly to pick it up, but his glare stopped her mid-motion. "Leave it." She froze again, her hand hovering in the air. And then she straightened, slowly, her eyes lowered, her voice small. "Yes, sir." He turned away before she even finished speaking. It wasn't anger anymore. It was disgust, as if her touch had contaminated the air he breathed. Elena stood there for a moment longer, staring at her reflection in that perfect mahogany surface. Her eyes were red, her uniform creased, her breath shaking. She looked smaller than she was, diminished, not because she'd lost her job, but because she had been dismissed like she was nothing. Outside, the world was still moving, cars rushing, sunlight spilling across the city. But inside her chest, something cracked. She walked out of that mansion without a word. No one stopped her. No one asked why. The guards didn't look up as she passed. The gates closed behind her with a metallic clang, sealing the distance between two worlds, the billionaire's marble kingdom and the maid's silence. The streets smelled like rain and gasoline. She didn't know where she was going. Her bus pass was nearly expired. Her hands still smelled like lemon polish. And somewhere, behind those tall glass walls, Alden Cross sat down at his desk again. He didn't think twice about her. To him, it was just another problem solved. A rule enforced. Order restored. But that desk didn't shine the same that day. Maybe it was the light. Maybe it was something else. He looked at the photo of his wife and noticed the glass was spotless, cleaner than it had been in years. For a moment, something stirred in his chest, an ache he couldn't name. He brushed it off, called his assistant, moved on. But that silence came back, the one that lived in the marble, the one that hummed around him every time he fired someone, every time he chose power over mercy. Days passed, then weeks. The new maid came and went. The dust returned faster than before. The shine dulled quicker. And Alden Cross started noticing things. The little mistakes, the coffee stains, the papers out of order, things Elena never missed. But he didn't say her name, not once. Meanwhile, Elena searched for work. No one wanted to hire someone fired from the Cross estate. Word traveled fast in circles like that. She took what she could, laundry shifts, part-time cleaning jobs, anything to keep the lights on in her tiny apartment. Nights were long. The city lights flickered through thin curtains, mocking her with their glow. Sometimes she replayed that morning in her head, the sound of the door, the shock in her chest, the way he said, "You're fired," like she was an inconvenience. She'd done everything right, every single thing. And yet, one touch was all it took to erase her. Still, she couldn't bring herself to hate him, not yet. Because deep down, she knew men like Alden Cross lived in prisons of their own making. But she also knew this wasn't the end. The story was still writing itself. Every humiliation leaves behind a seed, a quiet promise that someday, somehow, justice finds its way back around. Elena didn't know when or how, but she felt it. The weight of that photo in her hand, the reflection she'd seen in it, his reflection, standing over a document she'd glimpsed for only a second. Something secret, something that didn't belong there. She didn't understand it then, but she would. And when she did, the silence that haunted his marble halls would finally speak. For now, though, she walked home under a sky that looked bruised from rain. Her shoes soaked, her heart tired, but her spirit, somewhere deep down, still alive, still waiting. Because sometimes the people the world steps on are the ones destiny stands up for later. And as for Alden Cross, the man who thought he'd ended her story with 2 words, he had no idea his story had just begun. The camera would fade on his face that night, alone in his office, staring at that same photograph, unaware that the woman he dismissed had already become the mirror to his downfall. And that desk, the one she once polished with care, would soon hold the evidence that would undo everything he built. But not yet. For now, there was only silence. The kind that hums through marble halls and glass walls worth millions. The kind that always comes before the storm. The world outside didn't notice when Elena disappeared from the Cross estate. No one ever noticed when the help went missing. The city kept moving. The news kept spinning. The billion-dollar towers still glittered beneath the same uncaring sky. But inside that mansion, inside those cold, perfect walls, something changed. The air itself turned heavy. The light felt dimmer. The mirrors stopped shining the way they used to. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was karma. Maybe it was just the weight of silence. But the house seemed to remember her. Alden Cross didn't, at least not out loud. To him, Elena was just another name erased from the payroll. He told himself firing her was justified. Rules were rules. No one touched his desk. That's what he told his assistant, his lawyers, himself. But sometimes, when he entered the office before sunrise, he'd find himself looking toward that photo, the one of his late wife, and remembering that morning. The dust, the voice, the tremble in her hands. He'd catch himself thinking of her face right before he said it. "You're fired." Then he'd shake it off and get back to work. But the house didn't shake it off. The air grew colder, emptier. Even his new maid seemed afraid of the place. Once, he heard her whisper that the mansion felt haunted. He laughed it off, but part of him wondered, not by ghosts, but by shame. While his world stayed gold-plated and sterile, Elena's world was falling apart. She tried. Every morning she ironed her uniform, polished her shoes, and walked into hotels, restaurants, and homes with a hopeful smile. And every time, she walked back out with the same tight smile, the same quiet ache in her chest. "We're not hiring. We'll call you. Sorry, we're fully staffed." They never looked her in the eye, not once. At night, she sat in her small apartment on the south side, eating toast and tea because that's all she could afford. Her hands smelled of soap, even when she wasn't cleaning. She couldn't stop scrubbing things, her counter, her walls, her soul, as if she could wash away the humiliation that clung to her like a shadow. She replayed it in her head, over and over. His voice, his anger, that look, like she was something beneath him. And every time she'd whisper to herself, "You did nothing wrong." She'd say it again and again until the tears stopped coming. One evening, rain poured so hard the streets looked like rivers. Elena sat inside a small diner where the air smelled like grease and old dreams. She was sipping cheap coffee, trying to figure out how to stretch $20 through the week. The TV above the counter was playing the business news. They were talking about Alden Cross. "Shares down another 10%, one man said from the next booth. His tie was loose, his voice low. "The board's panicking. If that leak gets out..." Elena froze. She turned slightly, pretending to stir her coffee, but her ears sharpened. "The documents," the other man said. "The ones from last year. He wasn't supposed to sign that deal without disclosure. If anyone connects it back to him..." "Game over," the first man finished. Her heart pounded. Her spoon clinked against the cup. The rain outside grew louder, hammering against the window like drums. A deal, a document, a secret. Her mind raced back to that morning. The photo frame, the shine of the desk, the reflection in the glass. She remembered it vividly now. The curve of his shoulder, the shadow of another man standing beside him, a paper between them, a signature written fast. His face pale, nervous. She hadn't realized it then, but now she understood. She had seen something not meant to be seen. Her breath caught. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles turned white. The waitress came by, asked if she wanted a refill, but Elena barely heard her. Her thoughts were lightning, flashing, fierce, unstoppable. Alden Cross had fired her for touching his desk, but the real reason, the reason behind the rage, behind the coldness, wasn't dust. It was fear. Fear that she had seen too much. He thought she was gone, forgotten. But fate has a way of keeping receipts. Elena sat back in that diner booth and watched the rain. For the first time in months, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel invisible. Somewhere deep inside, a spark lit up. Not revenge. Not yet. Just truth. She left the diner, her coat soaked, but her eyes clear. The city lights blurred around her, neon and rain mixing into streaks of color. She felt like she was walking through a movie, one where the villain still thought he'd won. Back at the mansion, Alden was restless. He'd been snapping at staff all week, pacing his office like a trapped animal. The lawsuits were piling up. Investors were calling. He stared at the photo again, the same one Elena had cleaned, the same frame that once reflected his secret. And suddenly, for a reason he couldn't name, he felt watched. He turned sharply, expecting to see someone behind him. But there was no one there, just the empty desk, the rain tapping against the windows. The walls seemed to breathe. The silence returned. He sat down and pressed his palms against the desk's surface. It felt colder than usual. He tried to steady his thoughts, but the memory of that morning kept flashing. Her face, the reflection, the paper, the guilt. Meanwhile, Elena began to collect herself piece by piece. She took small jobs, cleaning stairwells, folding laundry, babysitting when she could. Every coin mattered. But more than money, she was building strength. Her spirit hardened into quiet determination. She didn't know how yet, but she knew one thing for sure. Truth doesn't stay buried forever. Every empire built on lies cracks from the inside. Every act of cruelty leaves a trail that leads right back home. And somewhere in the quiet between her prayers and her exhaustion, she felt it, the balance shifting. He was a man with everything, power, money, respect. But all of it sat on a foundation of fear. She was a woman with nothing, no job, no status, no voice. But she carried something he didn't, truth. One small, invisible woman, one secret too heavy to hide. That's how the world turns sometimes. The mighty don't fall from the top. They're undone by the people they never saw coming. Elena stood at her window that night, looking out at the rain-soaked city. She whispered to herself, not in anger, but in clarity. "He took my job," she said softly, "but not my sight." And far away, in his mansion of glass and silence, Alden Cross sat staring into the same storm. never realizing that the woman he dismissed had become the one person who could destroy him. The wind howled, the lights flickered, the rain fell harder. Two worlds, one secret, and for the first time, the balance between them began to move. Weeks passed, and the city had already forgotten her name. Elena had blended back into the rhythm of the working poor. Quiet mornings, long shifts, evenings spent with aching feet and a heavy heart. She didn't speak of what happened at the Cross mansion. She carried it like a bruise, invisible but deep. Some nights, she caught herself staring at her reflection in the window, remembering that day. The sound of the door slamming, his voice cutting through her pride, the photo trembling in her hands. She had tried to move on, but some wounds refused to close when the truth still breathes beneath them. Then, one afternoon, while she was mopping the floor of a small downtown library, a man appeared at the entrance. His clothes were neat but worn, his eyes sharp with curiosity. He held a small notepad and an old voice recorder. "Excuse me," he said softly, stepping closer. "Are you Elena Brooks?" She froze, the mop dripping water onto the tiles. "Depends on who's asking," she said cautiously. "My name's Jordan Price," he replied. "I'm a journalist with the Metro Tribune. I'm investigating Alden Cross. We believe he's involved in a major fraud case, something about a contract that vanished from public records. You worked for him, didn't you?" Her heart began to pound. Alden Cross. Even hearing his name sent a tremor through her body. She hadn't heard it spoken aloud in weeks. "I did," she said slowly. "A long time ago." He leaned forward. "Do you remember anything unusual about his office? Any documents, meetings, maybe something on his desk?" Her throat went dry. Her hands trembled against the mop handle. And then, like a film playing in her mind, it all came back. That morning, the reflection in the glass photo frame, Alden sitting across from another man, signing something quickly, nervously, before hiding it away. Her eyes widened. "There was a paper," she whispered. "A contract. I didn't read it, but I saw it, in the reflection of his wife's picture. He signed it in secret." Jordan's pen stopped mid-word. "You're sure?" She nodded slowly, the memory now sharp as glass. "I'm sure." For the first time, she realized what she'd seen, what she carried. That moment, the one that cost her everything, wasn't just humiliation. It was evidence. Jordan's expression changed. He leaned back, calculating. "That's exactly what we've been looking for," he said. "If you could testify or give a statement." But Elena shook her head. "No. I'm not here for revenge. I just want peace." "Peace," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "He fired you for nothing. He ruined your life. Don't you want justice?" She looked down at her reflection in the wet floor. "Justice and revenge aren't the same thing," she said softly. "And sometimes silence speaks louder than anger." Jordan didn't argue. He just nodded, closed his notebook, and left his card on the counter. "If you change your mind," he said, "call me." Days passed. Elena tried to forget the conversation, but her conscience wouldn't let her rest. Every time she turned on the news, Alden Cross's face appeared, confident, untouchable, lying through perfect teeth about transparency and trust. It made her sick, not because she hated him, but because she pitied the world that still believed in him. Then, one night, she saw it, a headline across the television screen. "Tech billionaire Alden Cross under investigation for fraud." The journalist's voice cut through the static. New evidence has surfaced from a former employee, revealing that Cross signed illegal contracts hidden from shareholders. Her breath caught. Photos flashed on the screen, images of documents, signatures, and a reflection in a photo frame. Her photo frame, her memory, now broadcast to millions. She hadn't spoken, but someone had listened anyway, and with that, Alden Cross's empire began to crumble. The next morning, news vans crowded outside his mansion. Reporters shouted his name as he tried to walk past. Investors pulled their money. The stock collapsed. His board turned against him. He was summoned to court, grilled by men he once commanded. The same reporters who once praised his brilliance now picked apart his lies like vultures. He lost everything, not slowly, but all at once. His company, his reputation, his peace. And in the middle of that storm, there was one image that haunted him, the photo of his wife on that desk. The same desk that now sat under piles of legal papers and subpoenas. Late one night, when the house was dark and the air heavy with defeat, Alden sat alone in his office. The silence pressed against him like a punishment. He looked around the room that once screamed power, the glass, the marble, the polished wood, and realized it all meant nothing. The desk gleamed faintly in the moonlight, and his eyes fell on that same photo. The frame still held a faint smudge, the last mark of her hand. He picked it up slowly, running his thumb along the edge. For the first time, he saw what she saw. His reflection in the glass, his own face twisted by pride and fear. He set the photo down and buried his face in his hands. "What have I done?" he whispered. His voice cracked, hollow. The same silence that once gave him power now echoed with shame. He thought about the woman he'd fired, the one whose name he never cared to remember. He saw her eyes again, steady and calm, even in humiliation. He remembered the way she didn't plead, didn't beg, just stood there, holding the truth in her silence. He would have given anything to see those eyes again, not out of guilt, but out of longing for the kind of peace she carried even when he took everything from her. The world outside roared with his downfall, but inside that office, the only sound was the ticking of a clock and the faint hum of regret. Elena saw the same story play out from her small apartment. The news anchors spoke his name with disgust. The world called him a monster, a fraud, a liar. But she didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She just whispered a quiet prayer for him, not for his success, but for his soul. Because deep down, she knew something the world didn't. Power breaks people long before it leaves them. Alden Cross thought he could own everything, time, money, people. But in the end, the only thing left for him to face was himself. And as the city moved on to the next scandal, two lives stood forever changed. One broken by arrogance, the other redeemed by grace. Elena went back to work the next day, still cleaning, still humble, still kind. But something in her had shifted. She no longer saw herself as small. She carried herself with quiet dignity, because she knew truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds its voice. And somewhere across the city, a man who once thought he ruled the world finally understood the cost of losing his humanity. The camera would close on his face, eyes red, soul hollow, whispering those same four words to the silence that once served him. "What have I done?" And the answer would echo through the empty halls. Respect is fragile, power fades, but truth never dies. Months passed. The world had moved on. The headlines that once screamed Alden Cross's name now whispered about new scandals, new kings of industry, new stories to devour. But for Alden, the noise had faded into something quieter, the sound of loneliness. His empire was gone, the mansion sold, the fortune locked away in lawsuits and debts. The people who once called him sir didn't return his calls. The silence he had once commanded now weighed on him like a punishment. He lived in a small apartment now, no marble, no glass walls, no view of the skyline. Just four plain walls, one creaking chair, and a man haunted by his own reflection. Sometimes, late at night, he'd catch his face in the mirror and barely recognize it. Not the billionaire, not the genius, just a man stripped bare of everything he thought made him matter. He'd stare at his hands and remember the moment they pointed at Elena. "You're fired." The words replayed over and over, sharper than a knife, echoing louder than his fall from grace. One cold morning, he woke up with a strange thought, maybe the only honest thought he'd had in years. He wanted to make things right. But apologies don't come easy to men who built their lives on pride. Still, something in him, maybe that last flicker of his late wife's memory, maybe Elena's calm eyes, pushed him to move. He asked around, searched online, even drove through neighborhoods he'd never stepped foot in before. And then he found her. The building was old, a brick community center tucked between two grocery stores. Paint peeled from the windows, but laughter spilled from inside. Through the glass, he saw her, Elena, her hair tied back, her posture straight, her presence steady. She was surrounded by young girls, their hands busy with thread and fabric, their faces bright. She was teaching them how to clean, how to mend, how to stand tall. There was something powerful in her calm, a quiet authority money could never buy. He stood outside for a long time, his hands shoved in his pockets, heart pounding like a guilty child's. When he finally gathered the courage to walk in, the laughter died down. The girls turned to look. He felt their eyes on him. This man in a wrinkled suit, out of place, out of character. Elena looked up, met his gaze, and for a second, neither spoke. She didn't look surprised. Maybe she had always known he'd come. He took a step closer, his voice low, shaky. "Elena," he said. The name felt heavy on his tongue. I came to say I'm sorry." The words barely made it out. They cracked halfway through, breaking something open inside him. She studied him quietly. There was no bitterness in her eyes, no triumph, no anger, just calm acceptance, the kind that comes from surviving storms no one else could see. She didn't need to ask what he was sorry for. They both knew. After a moment, she reached beside her and picked up a small white cloth. She held it out to him, her tone steady. "Then start by cleaning your own mess." For a second, he froze, not understanding. Then he saw it. The old desks behind her, covered in dust, the kind that clings to corners and refuses to leave. She turned away and went back to helping the girls, her movements graceful, unbothered. He stood there, the cloth in his hand, his reflection faint in the surface of one of those dusty tables. He could have walked away. Men like him always did. But something stopped him. Maybe for the first time in his life, he realized the lesson wasn't about words. It was about humility. So he bent down and started to clean. The room fell silent for a moment as the billionaire who once ruled over glass towers began wiping an old wooden desk. Slowly, awkwardly. His movements stiff at first, then careful, almost reverent. Dust floated into the sunlight like tiny ghosts, swirling and disappearing as he worked. Elena glanced at him but said nothing. The girls whispered, watching in disbelief, their giggles soft but curious. He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "Don't laugh," he said quietly, his voice lighter now. "I'm still learning." Elena's lips curved into the smallest smile. "We all are," she said. And for the first time in years, Alden laughed, not the kind that filled boardrooms or sealed deals, but the kind that freed something trapped inside his chest. The sound was warm, human, the sound of a man rediscovering humility. They worked side by side, wiping desks, folding cloths, sweeping floors. Hours passed unnoticed. The sun shifted through the windows, laying gold across the room. Alden's hands were raw, his back ached, but his heart felt strangely light. Every wipe of that cloth seemed to erase a little bit of his guilt, a little bit of the man he used to be. When the work was done, the room glowed. The desks shone in the sunlight, clean and simple. No marble, no gold, just wood and effort and grace. Alden stood there, staring at the reflection of the light across the polished surface. His reflection looked different now, smaller, softer, but real. Elena walked over and stood beside him. "You see," she said quietly, "it's not about what you own. It's about what you build and who you become while building it." He nodded slowly, emotion thick in his throat. "You were right," he said, "all along." She looked at him, her eyes kind but firm. "I didn't need to be right," she said. "I just needed to be respected." He swallowed hard. "And I didn't know how." "You do now," she replied. They stood in silence, watching the sunlight dance across the room. The sound of laughter returned as the girls played again, their joy echoing through the hall. The weight that once pressed down on Alden's shoulders began to lift, replaced by something new. Peace. Not the kind that comes from money or victory, but the kind that comes from truth. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door and looked back one last time. Elena was talking with one of the girls, her hands moving gently as she taught her how to stitch. Her presence radiated something no mansion could ever hold: grace. Alden smiled faintly, whispering to himself, "Some people spend their lives chasing shine. Others, they create it through grace." He stepped into the sunlight outside, blinking against its warmth. The air felt cleaner. The city sounded different. And for the first time in his life, Alden Cross, the man who once believed the world owed him everything, understood that dignity isn't given. It's earned, one humble act at a time. And somewhere behind him, Elena stood by the clean desk, the sunlight hitting it just right. She watched the glow spread across its surface, soft and pure, and smiled. Because in the end, it wasn't about power. It was never about revenge. It was about balance. Respect has no price tag, and dignity, once lost or given, always finds its way back.